right. Hello. I'm so excited. Linda, we get to do this. I'm here with Linda Tellington-Jones, my auntie, and who has led a truly remarkable and full life. I mean, you're still living it. But when you every time I speak to you, I hear a new story that I hadn't heard before with a new detail. And I wanted to take this opportunity to get into this series and talk story with you and go through some of the most spectacular parts of your life. I mean, I think your whole life is amazing. And I really think you're like I mean, you might not feel this way, but you're really like a feminist icon in a lot of ways. The things you did way ahead of your time and have always been ahead of your time. I think it's really invaluable to hear your story. And I know I'm excited to hear all the parts I haven't heard before and the details I don't know.
I know, and it's so fun to share them with you.
I know, it's wonderful. So I thought, what better place to start than the beginning? And I thought in this today, we will just talk about your early life and just how these early influences have helped shape where you are today. So were you born you were born in Canada? I know that much. Where were you born?
Edmonton at I think the Royal Alex Hospital.
Yeah. So and then from there you all moved to a mining camp, is that right?
Well, the thing is, at that time I was born, I think your grandfather, my dad, it was during I was born in 1937, so
right before World War II.
Yeah, just before. And so my dad, when I was 3 years old, Dad moved to up to the Northwest Territories to Yellowknife. And at that time, it was just it was a camp. It's a town now, but it was a camp. And he went up to help my grandfather, George K. Wood, with a gold mine that he had. And my dad built, there were no houses, regular houses there. So he put a big tent. I wish I remember the dimensions, but it was a big tent. It had like a bedroom and a living room, kitchen, on wood and, wood floor. And then it had wood sides up about, I don't know, maybe 6 feet. And the first, I don't have this memory with this bear, but it's a really special picture because my Aunt Helen, Dad's sister, was there visiting us in the camp. And I am sitting in this picture, sitting on her lap, and she has a baby bear that Dad had rescued because the mother had been shot, and they found this bear, and the baby bear is on my aunt's lap, and I'm standing beside it, and my little tiny fingers, I think I was 11 months old, I have to remember, are behind the ear. And in Germany, where I'm known, the Germans have such an interesting way of looking at it. It was the beginning of TTouch because I have my fingers behind the bear's ear, just like today we do the ear TTouch. So you see, that was the beginning. That was the beginning.
I love it. And I think that photo's at in the front of several of your published books as well. Right, it's a great black and white photo. Oh yeah. So, and I mean, and for anyone that doesn't know, Yellowknife is still a fairly remote place. I mean, you're really in the middle of nowhere. There's muskeg. I mean, so what a time to be growing up there. How many years were you up there for?
A couple of years. And then and I just want to talk about memories that I do have of Mother taking me in the canoe on, I think it was Great Slave Lake, and canoeing and having this cat that was like one of these really character brave kitties. When I remember one time when the cat came, or maybe Mom talked about it, but it's really strong in my mind of this cat who came down to the dock and jumped in the water and swam out to us to meet us in the canoe. It was great. And one time Mother said that she would go and she would go from where we were living, she would walk to the gold mine through the woods. And one time, like as she was walking back, she saw that there were bear tracks right along the trail where we were. It was very remote. And your grandmother, my mom, was such a brave person.
Well,
Really.
was it Jerry, your second brother, or your first brother, the second born 12 pounds breech, born in that tent?
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's if that's not brave, I don't know what is. And they should went on to have more kids.
Yeah, 5 more.
Pretty
No,
wild.
4.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I always think about that. But yeah, she was pretty remarkable. And so that was really like your early years during the war, was up in that mining camp in Yellowknife.
Well, and then I think when I was there a couple of years,
Yeah.
and then we moved to Gibbons, Alberta, which
Oh,
is
I
about
didn't know that.
30 miles, right? You didn't even know, right?
Yeah.
30 miles north of Edmonton. It was really remote. And Dad went there to help his father, Jim Hood, with the raising of a lot of pigs and wheat for the war effort. And you know what was really interesting is that Dad was born, my father, your grandfather, Harold Hoodie Hood, right, was born in Ontario. And his dad got the idea of moving to Alberta. I'm not sure why. I don't know the stories. But what was interesting, he bred my grandfather, George, no, sorry, Jim, bred really great draft horses. And I don't even know which breed, which is a shame because Canada is really well known for their really good horses. And so he brought 12 of them out on train, thinking they were going to be able to sell them to buy a farm. And as it turned out, because of the war, he didn't sell them. And so he developed a way of I think it was at least a 6-horse hitch on these huge, big harrows, so they could do a lot of farming, instead of just a couple of horses. And my dad, Hoodie, your grandpa, he was just this really amazing, creative person.
Well, I think he was from all the stories, just such an innovator and just always open to new ideas. Like, I think they were involved in some of the early alfalfa dehydrating, even like one of the first chairlifts at Jasper at the ski hill. I just think I love it. I always wish he had met my husband Walt, because I think they would have gotten along. I mean, two Virgos that might have clashed a little with their very strong ideas, but I think they would have enjoyed all the fun ideas. Very adaptable.
Really adaptable. So on the farm, what I remember about farm life, that's when I was 6, I think we were there maybe a year, and then I turned 6, and school in rural Alberta was like down the road, and there were no such thing as a bus. And most kids walked. And in the winter, there was a sleigh with a heater in the sleigh that would pick up kids on one road, but we were on a totally different road. And my cousins lived like an 1/8 of a mile towards school. And so Dad decided that I had to ride to school. I couldn't walk alone. And I remember him taking me to a riding stable and telling this, the stable owner that I needed a horse to ride. And they brought this mare out named Trixie, and we have a great picture of her. She was a really beautiful mare, and put me on her. And I don't remember ever being told, like, okay, what do I do with the reins? I don't remember any of that. But what I do remember is the mare promptly walked, thank heaven, only walked out the gate and walked directly back to the barn. And Dad bought her, took her home, and I rode to school bareback.
At 6.
At 6. I mean, can you even imagine that?
No, I can't, but
I
guess, sink or swim, Linda.
Yeah, and I mean, and the strangest thing, Mandy, I don't ever remember being afraid, but I think that was probably because of the role model of my parents. Fear wasn't part of their, you know,
It wasn't a useful emotion.
right, exactly. They're very
Yeah.
courageous. So anyway, so I would ride like a eighth of a mile and then meet my cousins at the gate, and then we'd ride to school. And in the school, there was a stable with tie stalls. I don't think the horses even had hay.
Wow.
And they just stayed all day. And then we'd ride home, and then I would ride some more. I mean, almost every day we'd go ride home, and it was about, it was a good mile and a half, almost 2 miles. Yeah.
Wow. That was a
Good
fit
treat.
horse.
Yeah, on bareback.
A fit kid too. Wow.
And
So how long did you have Trixie for?
until we moved to Edmonton, and Dad didn't bring her with us. I mean, there were no trailers then for
Well,
horses.
no, and you guys really moved to Edmonton. I mean, you went from rural to the city, right? Like it was a real neighborhood, wasn't it? No? It was a
And
different house than I've seen.
no, now it's grown up. Holy mackerel. When we moved to, well, first of all, I want to tell you something that's pretty interesting. And that is, I was in a classroom, a school, where every first to sixth grade had one row. And in the third grade, there were a second grade, there were no kids. I was the only one. So
Oh, wow.
I jumped the third grade, and the teacher would teach each class and then go back to the other, and you'd have work to do. And then isn't that wild?
Wow. That's, well, I mean, I guess it's that sort of single room schoolhouse in rural Alberta. Wow. And
Yeah,
so did most of the kids ride to school?
no,
No,
I don't remember any other kids
besides your
other than
cousins.
my cousins.
Wow. Hmm.
Yeah.
Pretty
And
amazing.
I have to tell you, okay, you wanted to know how my early years influenced the work, the TTouch. Okay, so one day I was late, and my cousins had gone without me. So I get to their gate, and my mare says, "No way, I'm not going." And what I remember is like giving her a whack, the best a 6-year-old can. Well, I guess
Yeah.
by then I could have been maybe 7, possibly even 8.
Yeah.
So I
But
could have given
still,
her
you know,
good whack, and she promptly spun around, dumped me. And somehow I kept a hold of the reins. And of course, I couldn't get on there. And I remember like marching home, marching into the stable, tying her up. This is what I remember, marching to the house, sticking my hand in the clothespin bag, walking back and sticking the clothespins on her ears so that she would learn a lesson. For those
how'd
of
that
you,
work?
well, it got me, maybe that's where the ear TTouch started.
Wow. Not sure it was meant as a punishment.
Whoa,
Oh, funny.
isn't
So
that
what?
wild?
Yeah, that is that, you think about the things as a child that you sort of conceptualize and make sense at the time. But I mean, I'm sure the horse thought, listen, my buddies are usually here. Why aren't my friends here? We're going home. My friends aren't here to meet me.
Take care of this kid.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's unbelievable. So how old were you when you went to sort of the city? I guess it wasn't the city. I always picture you guys moving to that house on 100 and, well, I'm not sure what street it even is. I was so little when I've driven past it.
118th.
Right.
When we moved there, remember driving through Edmonton and down the road, it was out of the city.
Was it? Okay.
Oh yeah,
Not anymore.
way out of the city. And so we drove past on 156th Street. It's so funny, I remember that. We drove past and there were like 30 horses doing a quadrille.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was at Briarcrest Stables. And I'd never had a lesson. I was 9 at that point. And I asked my dad if I could take lessons. And he said, yes, if you can get a job and trade for lessons. So the next like Saturday, he drove me to the gate, set me up at the gate. I marched in. I mean, what? I can't believe it. It didn't cross my mind that it wouldn't work. And I asked Mrs. Alice Metherall if I could trade lessons for for work, cleaning stalls or something. And so she asked me about my writing background. And of course, I told her I've written at that point, I mean, every day of my life since I was 6 years old. And so she put me on a horse and she saw, that I really could ride. And it's so funny because my best friend, Diane Weeb, later Hemstock, writes in the book Strike a Long Trot. She was quoted for the book. And she said, they always call me the queen because all the other kids were cleaning tack and cleaning stalls. And I just got to ride. So I would, and we rode to school. And my first horse that my dad bought for me was, you'll see the pictures. She looked like a half draft. And we called her Black Beauty. And there's a picture of me on her, and I had a big, like sort of Mexican.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen that photo. Yeah.
And I'm holding my sister Susan in front of a Western saddle, and I had this like lariat, rawhide lariat thing. And if you look closely on the bridle, I had bought these little brilliant things like they're fake jewels, and put them on the bridle. I made that myself.
Wow. Little flair, a little extra flair, you need the full ensemble. I feel like this like innate fearlessness you've had has helped shape your entire life. You just go in with this self-confidence that everything will be okay. I think so many things that you've done.
And it's trust because I had such a solid parents. We were really blessed, and they were great role models.
Yeah. And they've always been so open to opportunities and possibilities, I think.
Yes, and that was Dad.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, like, one of the memories that's in one of my books that I have when we were on the farm, that is with my grandparents from my dad's side, is we would go when I was 6 and 7. We would go out and we'd make these fake stalls, and about fake, I mean, we lay stones out on the ground.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, did you ever do that
as kids? Yeah, you kind of build an imaginary structure or something based on the outlines.
Yeah, just on the outline. And it was one of the memories I have that Mother talked about is my father James's grandfather James had a dog that maybe was part coyote, certainly acted like it, and he only listened to my grandfather, but he followed me everywhere. And one day my mom was calling me to come in, and I was out doing something because we were outside all the time, with doing things with the horses and the chickens and really having a good time outside. And I didn't come in. And, she said, you come in. And I talked back to her, which I never did. And she came out and she got me with a hairbrush, and she put me over her knee and started giving me a spanking with a hairbrush, and the dog nipped her in the butt. Yeah, we kind of laughed about that as I grew up.
He was your quiet protector.
Right, he was definitely my quiet protector.
Yeah. So when you were at Briarcrest, because you had, a very natural seat, obviously, from your many, many hundreds of hours in the saddle, I think, if I recall,
on the bareback.
Yeah, I mean, you could stay on a horse, right? You had a Velcro seat. Did you help start a lot of the horses there as well? Is that right? Did I make up that little tidbit, or is that true?
No, you didn't make it up. I had a role in it. I mean, my role was I would come, so I'd ride to school to the west, which is, school was only maybe a mile. I mean, why didn't I walk? All the other kids walked, but
it's more fun to ride. That's why.
Right. Again, we had a stable there. Then I'd ride toward home, past our gate, and then I'd go another 1.5 miles to Briarcrest on the same road. That was the 118th Avenue. And And then I would ride 2 or 3 horses, like every night after school, and then ride home in the dark. It was really interesting. And so my job was, I really feel, it's so sad when I think about it. So every Friday, Mrs. Metherell had about 80, 90 horses on the property. Some were rentals, some were school horses, and the rentals would go out on the weekend, and there were beautiful, beautiful wooded areas that you could rent a horse for an hour and go riding. And my job was, like, every Friday I would get on these horses with a rubber bat about that long and like just give them a couple of whacks and ride them for 2 or 3 minutes and straighten them out. I mean, strange, huh? When I think of
Yeah,
that today.
I feel like, I hope we could all say, if I knew then what I know now, I'd do something differently. And you think, well, that's like at least like a lifetime ago for a lot of people. So,
Well, and also the thing is, as we gain more understanding and compassion
mm,
and ways of working with those horses so that they are cooperative. I mean, that's what we do with our methods today. Horses want to work with us, but that was different. So then
totally. Well,
I
the
would,
role of horses has changed, hasn't it? I mean, at that point, they were still more really a working animal
very much.
and less sort of a companion and, hobby, where I think for most people, that's how they feel about their horses. It's really something they want to connect with on a deeper level than just a tool.
Some.
Yeah. But I mean, in general, I think
Those
it's
who
more
come to
common.
us,
Life's a little different now. Life's easier in
totally,
some ways,
totally different. And so then the other thing is, I rode the show horses. Now, Mrs. Metherall had really nice thoroughbreds, really top show horses and top thoroughbreds, mostly focusing on pleasure, which we had in Canada, and hunter hacks and jumping. And so I would get to work with those horses. And then if she started a young horse, she had a really small round pen, and she had been really hurt several times because she would buck these young horses out. And I remember horses trying to climb the walls. I mean, so she'd buck them out, and then she'd take them out of the round pen into the arena, of course, the outdoor arena, which had lights. That's why we could ride more horses, because you'd still be riding in the dark, of course. In Canada, after 4 o'clock, it was dark. And
unless it's summer.
in the winter, sorry. And so it was so then she would pony the horse that she just bucked out on her horse. She did for that, put on a Western saddle. Normally we all rode in English because of the jumping and all that we did. And she'd tie the horse's head to the young horse that had never been out of the arena under saddle. And I was the kid who was put on that horse. And I always joke, and in one of my books, I joke about being a little shorter than Robin because I was jumped so many times on my head. But actually,
all the compression.
it's but right, but it's not true, because I really was very seldom. I don't know that I was ever bucked off one of those horses, actually, when I think about it.
Yeah.
And in those days, you must have heard this. It was said that a person could not be considered a rider until they had been bucked off, fallen on, jumped on, tread on 100 times.
Yeah.
Thank heaven, thanks to Sally Swift and Peggy Cummings and centered riding and connected riding and what we do, of course, with horses. That's just not true anymore, but it sure was true then. And so one day when I was maybe 12, I think I was about 12, I'm riding home on a really nice day, one of the days, it wasn't raining, it wasn't snowing. And I was riding past the gate from a property that was just behind the Briarcrest stable property. And this old man on a cane walked out. It was a long driveway. It was at least, I'd say, 200 meters, a couple of 100 yards. And he walks out with a book in his hand. And he stopped me and he said that he'd been watching me over the fence because you could see the round pen and the bucking out that went on. And he didn't tell me much, but he'd been a rider in the cavalry. It must have been the Canadians that joined the Spanish-American War.
No.
You know, it was really
I
interesting.
don't know. I'm going to look it up now, though. I didn't know that part of the history. Yeah.
And it was a book written by an American cavalry officer on how to start young horses without ever bucking. And we can't find the book. I mean, one of these days somebody has to have it in a library. And so I took it home, and my parents, we had, I think, maybe 40 acres, maybe 50 acres. And they boarded a few horses for friends of theirs. And they had a 2.5-year-old mare who was already 16 hands. She'd been led, she'd never been blanketed. You know, they stayed outside in the pasture. So I took her and I just followed the book step by step. And ground driving off the bit. Later we didn't do it, we didn't start them off the bit, but I don't know, it took me a few weeks. I just followed the book step by step. And I remember the first time I pulled her up to a straw bale and mounted her. And because she'd been ground driven, she knew how to turn and stop. And I, of course, used clear voice signals. So she was just wonderful. And that's how I began with 12 years old, starting young horses without ever bucking or being afraid.
Didn't need to be bucked out or snubbed to a pony horse.
Exactly.
Much more pleasant for her, I'm sure, and you.
Yeah, a lot safer.
Wild. So was it at this time you also did a mail order book about horse personality that you had seen in a magazine about whirls and
it was a horse magazine, and it said it offered for $100 you could get this book, and it was
$100.
$100.
That would have been a lot at that point in time.
I didn't buy it.
Oh.
No, it was just an offer from the magazine, and it was Dr. James Barry. And he had, in one of the things, a few pages in that book was pictures of a horse with, like, you know, flaring nostrils, ears pinned back, really Roman nose, and then another horse with a dish face. And he said that, you know, the horse that's going to be in the bucking string is going to be that horse with the ears pinned and the moose and the big Roman head. And the other horse would be really like reactive, spooky, the dish face horse. And so I took the book out, and I remember looking at the horses in our pasture. I think we had 5 or 6 horses, and just becoming interested. And over the years, you know, it's funny, I can't remember when I think it was when I came to Europe that I began to notice all the different breeds that had the different shapes of the head. And that's when I started, you know, really looking at the shape of the nostrils, the chin, the length of the mouth, the variety of, like, the jibba on the Arabian horses, what that meant, and this, you know, all the things from my personality book, the set of the ears, you know, how wide apart they are, the shape of the eyes, and the length of the mouth, and it was it was a big influence. So how did I get the book? I didn't pay $100. I just ignored it. And then I got an offer some months later for like, I don't know, I think it was $10 a month for 10 months. And there's no way I could do that. And then I got it for $10 for $1 a month. And I bought it. That's how I got it.
You drove a hard bargain.
Kind of like eBay. Yeah, well,
you know, but what's so amazing about that, and again, I think it has been a vein through your entire life, is this openness and the curiosity to exploring these ideas. Because I mean, I don't know many 12-year-olds that would have really, like, decided to really, okay, well, that was interesting, and start noticing it in different contexts of horses. Yeah. But I mean, it's it's pretty remarkable, really.
It is. I mean, and you see, I mean, I was very much inspired by Dad because we lived on a farm, and of course, first, actually, why we moved from the pig and wheat farm with my dad's parents, he went into business with my uncle. And my uncle Alf was a pilot in the north, and he was in contact with my George Kaywood, who was thought to be my grandfather, but he was actually my great uncle, and that's another story we'll go
Yeah.
into. I mean, it's an amazing,
It
amazing
is.
story. And so he would fly over and he'd tell my George Kaywood, he'd tell him where these interesting looking anomalies in the earth were. And that's how he became a multimillionaire from making claims for, God, now can I remember what?
Like mineral claims.
Uranium.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, uranium.
Wow.
Yep. And so that, and he lived with us as they got older, but otherwise he was also, I mean, that was Mom's side, and he was out there, he was in the oil fields of Leduc, Alberta at the time, very active had the gold mine. He was into logging with a big logging company. I mean, and he is the one who said that the way he would, when he was prospecting in the north, there were no trains, planes, or automobiles. Well, there were planes. It was a little,
bush plane.
Bush planes on pontoons. Yeah, it landed on the lakes. But
Wild.
he said the way he would be able to walk all day was by counting his breaths and just 4 in, 4 out, 4 in, 4 out. And later, I mean, I did that with my riding students, and I'd have them count the strides of the horse, 1, 2, 3, 4, like at the trot and at the gallop. It's okay at the walk, but not have as much fun as at the trot and the canter. And it was based on his stories. And it was also really interesting then, later when I moved to Santa Fe and I was walking the dogs every morning. I'm trying to think anywhere else we were. Oh, that's because we weren't living on a ranch or a farm. So you had to take the dogs out before they were just with us all day. But I was just trying to think. I don't know where I started this, maybe because at one point in my life I was doing the 5 Tibetans, and I was paying attention to different types of breathing. So for I don't know, countless times, I would then practice breathing in 4 steps, out 4 steps. Then, okay, let's breathe in 6 steps and then breathe out more. And I got to the point that I could breathe in 6, out 12. And then I played around with this, there's another yoga practice where you hold your breath, like you'll breathe in so many, and then so many steps, then hold my breath, breathe out, and hold my breath again. And that's thanks to my grandfather.
I mean, because there's so many teachings now about being aware of your breathing and conscious breathing, but you learn that from your grandfather as a child, and again, taking that on board and being conscious of it and exploring it, the possibilities again. I mean, you kind of take it for granted because it's just how you are, but it's not how everyone works.
That's
pretty amazing.
It came from.
Wow.
And we should put a picture of me with Princess Alia El Hussein in Jordan, because when I was 6 years old, my uncle Tony Ladd, who was
which side is that on?
Aunt Muriel's.
So it's
no, not Muriel. No, not Muriel. Aunt Helen's husband. I think my father's sister's husband was the Ladd family from Portland, and they owned a lot of Portland. And I remember hearing him tell my parents stories around the farmhouse table when he was visiting when I was 6 or 7. And my mother said, oh, that Uncle Tony, he could be home in an Indian teepee or in a castle. And I thought, I want to be like my Uncle Tony. And somehow I got the idea, if that was true, you had to be curious and learn to eat anything. And somewhere I read, or maybe I remembered from a past lifetime, this idea that if you were in a sheik's tent in the desert in the Middle East, and you were the guest of honor, you were offered the sheep's eyeball. And I decided to practice eating like anything that was reasonable given to me, and so that I would develop my ability to eat other things. Now,
Well, that'll be a whole other story, I think. I'm sure
yes,
you've gotten to practice that in your lifetime.
I did, and with pictures.
Amazing.
So we'll come to that eventually, because
Wow.
it was in the Middle East, in Jordan, with Princess Alia. Yes, and that's a whole other story. We've
It
got
is.
it.
So I mean, all these, and you also were a catch rider as a youth, right? At the big horse shows? Because
Right.
Again, I'm sure that has played a huge role in how you are so comfortable just getting on horses you've just met.
Absolutely. I mean, because I had so much experience, then from the time I was 9, riding several horses a day, young horses preparing for showing. And at horse shows, we had some boarders at the Briarcrest stable, that really beautiful thoroughbreds, but they didn't want to get out there in the show ring, and I loved doing it. And so I would get on a horse for you'd have between a class 10 minutes, and just do a little walk, trot, and canter. And my whole idea, Mandy, was I want this horse to have as good a time as I'm having. It's not that, okay, I'm going to show this horse what to do and we're going to go in and win. It was never my idea. And I don't know where I got this relationship. How can I be with this horse in a way that makes the horse's life pleasant? It's fascinating when I think about it. And I remember I was at a horse show, and there was this old cowboy there. By the way, at these horse shows, unless you've been to Madison Square Gardens or the Calgary or Edmonton Spring Horse Show, you would have these are huge shows.
Indoor shows, yeah, big indoor shows.
Huge arenas
Washington or
held
Toronto,
6,000, people. They had live organs for every class. There was a live organist.
Yeah.
And in classes, you often had 50, 60 horses in pleasure classes.
Wow.
That's a lot of horses. And what I remember, and this is so interesting, Mother sitting on the edge of the arena, and every time I would go by, she'd say, "Smile, dear," really quietly. And I didn't understand while she was still alive what that did, because when you smile, it puts you in this sense of well-being, activates the serotonin, and the horse feels that, and it makes him happier because you're feeling happier. And it really worked. But I have to tell you something really funny. And we should put this picture with Jerry. We should someday do this with our brother Jerry and have him talk about what it was like, because he didn't practice between the Edmonton Spring Horse Show. And I mean, just think about it. Okay, the show started on a Saturday. It went through the whole week and ended the following Sunday. And it would start at 8 in the morning and the classes finished at 11 at night.
Wild.
And
He just get on and do it.
Yeah, my brother.
And your parents in the family class. I mean, that's wild too.
Unbelievable when you see it. I mean, because we had these family classes, as you know, and there were usually maybe 5 or 6 families. There was one other family like us, the Hurons, and I think they had maybe 5 riders. But we had Mom and Dad, myself, my brother Jerry, my sister Susan, my brother John, and Robin was in the lead. She was on on a lead line. When we would canter, she would just wait for us. But mom and dad would just come and they practice. I'm sure it wasn't more than 2 times, maybe even only once. And the horses all had to go together at the walk, trot, and canter around the arena. And they were the horses that didn't have, like Mrs. Mather would paint with kind of chalk or something, like the same blazes on the horses. And yeah, they had the same blazes. And
So they don't match.
yeah,
Oh,
always all matched. Yeah.
wow. I mean, it's amazing. Like, to think about it now, I actually can't even imagine, just the chaos. I mean, all cantering in like a big drill. You don't know the horses that well, obviously, because they know what most of the family doesn't ride regularly. I mean, just pretty amazing. I love it. It's so great. So I think what if you were gonna, I mean, you can't take away from the experiences you had or want to actually change them, but if you were going to give your young self if you wish you could give your young self one piece of advice, what would it be? And I know it's kind of a big question, and maybe you didn't really need advice, but because look where you ended up.
Well, I'll tell you advice that I got that was totally life-changing, and it affected me from that day on. I was I think I might have been 12 or 13, and at a big the Edmonton spring horse show. And I was warming up a horse, and I have no idea, like, why this old cowboy, and he had, at my age, I don't know, maybe he wasn't as old as I think like he was in his
Hard to tell when you're 13.
Really hard to tell when you're 13. But he said something to me. I said, something like, I see you riding all these horses, and I just want to give you one piece of advice. If you ever lose your temper, get off and tie the horse up and cool down before you ride. Now, I tell that story, and I suddenly realize, I wonder if that was my grandfather who told me that. So I don't know, one or the other, but whoever it was, I
Stuck with you.
really took that to heart. Because, and particularly because of Mrs. Metherall, the way she started young horses over a jump, you'd sit on the horse, and all the jumps had wings, and she'd be out there with a 10-foot bullwhip and like snap it at them, and you'd run over the jumps.
Not much preparation.
No, none of the wonderful, prep and chance that we give horses to understand what we want of them. No, interesting.
Wow. I mean, I think that's probably good advice for most parts of our life, horses or otherwise.
Yeah.
When just feeling anger, it's just that, rather than just being in a state of reactivity. Well, I guess it doesn't matter who told you that. It's pretty valuable advice.
Well, it was either, maybe it was an angel, dressed like a cowboy.
I mean, who knows, but it's pretty amazing that stuck with you, and it's great advice. So, and then the other question, because I think that for you, and I think all of my mother and all of your siblings, I think that my grandparents and your parents were just such incredible role models. What would you say was one of the most valuable lessons that they gave you? I mean, I know there's so many, but they really lived life.
There are some really outstanding ones. And one is to not be prejudiced. And, in those days in Edmonton, there was a lot of prejudice against the Indians, and also Ukrainian people who were moving in. People were not kind to them, and my mother never allowed us to be gossip or be critical. Really interesting. And I remember one day, after the war, that train track went by the house, and now it's in the middle of the city, but it was out in the country, and there was nothing around it for at least a half a mile. We were totally isolated, and off the tracks came a hobo, because they used to, I guess, people
Ride the rails to,
ride the rails,
Yeah.
not having anything else to do, and came to the door and asked for food. And mother invited him into the porch and said that she would be happy to feed him and would give him a job to do. So it wasn't just a handout. And she said she did it so that he would have some pride and not feel, that he was just getting a handout. And
I think you always had, I think grandma always had different people at Thanksgiving or anyone that needed somewhere to go. You'd always have different people that just, were, so they weren't lonely and they weren't alone and they, could join the family for an evening.
or she would pick them up on the road and bring them
Well,
home.
sometimes my own mother does that too. So it must be inherited.
Well, I did it too.
Yeah.
I did it once. I met a person on a plane flying into London who had no place to stay, a young woman, and I took her home to stay with my friend, for God's sake, without asking her. We got that.
It's really, I mean, they lived the golden rule, didn't they? Just treat others at how you'd want to be treated.
And not only that, I mean, she had a little, it was a crocheted little thing that hung on the wall that said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And they lived that. And when Dad died, at the memorial that we had for him, this young woman, Native Canadian woman, came and just wanted to let Mother know that Dad had helped them out at a time when that was really hard for their family, and she just wanted to come just pay her respects and give her thanks, and Dad did that. And listen, I have to tell you something else about my dad. When I was 11, we had he had gone into the dairy business with my uncle, and who had the money, the one who found the uranium, the multimillionaire. And so Dad had, I think, about 30 cows. And so then he found out, that was really hard work, for heaven's sake, for no money. And so we just kept one cow, Jersey cow. We had Holstein cattle for the milk cows. But then when he sold the herd and he started growing alfalfa, and that's when he got the dehydrating, the first one that came into Edmonton. He went to get it from Kansas. My dad got on a train, rode to Kansas, borrowed the money from the bank, bought the dehydrating plants, and came back and set them up, and set up a corporation, and made my mom the president, and all of us 6 kids had even shares in the company. And he had a very good friend who was an accountant, and they were friends, and they've been friends forever, and they were friends until they died. Wow. It was really correct. I mean, so inspiring, but we still had to have milk, right? And so my dad gave me a cow for, I think it was my 12th birthday, a beautiful Jersey. And I would have to milk her before school. And listen, you all,
they make a lot of milk.
If you've never lived in the north when your hands have to be bare, I mean, I had cracks in my hands that I used to have nightmares about, that they would open. And you'd lean your head against the cow like this. I mean, that's why I ride so easily and use 4 reins plus a Lindell, or also sometimes you can have a lot of things in your hands and know what you're doing because of this movement of both hands of milking. But I'd go to school smelling. I mean, fortunately, all the kids
like a cow udder.
Yeah. So it wasn't until I was telling this story at 21, how I was, for my 21st birthday, we had a gathering and my parents were there, and I told this wonderful story how my dad had given me this cow for my maybe 12th birthday. And then I thought, oh, of course, so I would milk her. I mean, it was so interesting. But instead of just telling the kid to go out and milk the cow, it was my cow. And that summer, we still, when we were growing the hay, before he figured that's depends on the seasons too much now. Then he sold that, and then he bought a peat bog, and Alberta rose peat moss went to Japan, went all over the world. That was my dad. And anyway, that summer, the hay had to be cut, and it was raked with a horse pulling a rake. I was the kid who drove the horse and the rake. And at the end of the summer, my dad said I had done the work of a man. I should get paid like a man, and gave me a check. And I remember walking to the bank with my grandfather to put that money in the bank. And one of the things that my dad said to me is, if you have to loan money, do so, but don't necessarily expect to get it back. Interesting, eh? I'm not sure that was good advice, because maybe had I expected it,
You would have been a little more demanding. Wow.
No,
I mean, just so
sure.
many things. That's why you're so good at ground driving, right? All that time on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. No question.
Wow. So, I mean, that's just so many hours, around horses, on the backs of horses, behind driving horses, handling horses. And so yeah, I mean, and then you were at the Edmonton horse show is actually where you went, is that correct? Or went saw you, which will be the rest of the story. I think our next chat, we'll talk about your chapter with Wentworth Tellington, who certainly helped shape a lot of your horse life as well, and change the trajectory of your life completely.
Totally. And for those of you, I mean, it's really shocking to think I was 15 years old when I met him, and he was
shocking today.
35.
Yeah. Wow. But we'll get into that with our next episode. But I mean, wow. I mean, this is like, you think about what you've done up to age, 14 or 15. It's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Linda. This is so fun. I'm looking forward to our next chat, because I think it's so important. I mean, there's just so many lessons have come with you from such an early age that.
Right. And think of some of the other things for your questions that you have, because there are little things, that it's really fascinating to straighten out. I just want to throw in one memory that really, there are two things that gave me my courage that I have today. And I learned how to overcome fear when I was like 9 or 10, and I want to talk about it the next time. But the other thing that I have is a memory of sitting up in a combine with a team of horses pulling this in a huge, wheat field, and sitting up there and having the grain like come in, and then smelling the workhorses, like, oh my God, it's like I can still smell them. And we had a horse that would pull a stone boat, it was called. It was like a.
Is it like a sledge?
A sled thing, a flat that you do stones on, but we would go out and fill holes in the fields, and those are such precious things. And one of the things that I don't have regrets in this phase of my life. I'm going to talk about a couple of my regrets, and some of them you're going to really get a kick out of. But some of them I want to share with you, for some of you who still have your parents. Some of the things that I would do differently today if I went back, and I can only pray, for forgiveness for it. So I want to share things like that also.
Okay. And the next one?
And the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Well, I had so much fun. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, wait, Mandy, before you go, I just want to introduce you, because you didn't really, we didn't.
I know, but I'm not I don't know. I did. I was so excited to hear your story.
I know, but it's so important for you all to know that Mandy was riding in utero 3 days before she was born, that my sister had you out riding, and you've ridden every day practically since. I mean, it's amazing. when I think, and I want to bring in some of the pictures and stories with you.
Okay.
Because this young woman sitting here, when she was 6 years old, talk about me. I mean, it runs in the family, you all. When you were 4, you got on a plane, you were put on a plane in Edmonton and flew to Denver, and Robin went and picked you up, and
Yeah.
Mandy came to my 8-day horse training, and we have to show those pictures of you in your boots and breeches and your hat. And then when you were 18 months, riding on a horse with 2 sets of reins and a little whip there, riding this Icelandic horse. And then I'll save the next one for the next time, what you did at 6 years old.
Oh, well, lots of time on horses, I guess.
Yes.
In the blood.
It's in the blood. And we'll bring in some pictures of Robin too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, and I'm sure we could bring in Robin, because she's got to spend a lot of her youth with you at the school.
Exactly.
Very fun.
And before even.
Yeah. Very fun. Oh, well, thank you, Linda. We will chat again soon.
Until then.